So, no happy endings for Nepo babies. No happy endings. Not everything should be bad about Grimdark. So we have the best places to live in Warhammer 40k. Civilized worlds. See, I shouldn't even say it like that. Say it like I'm selling something. Civilized worlds. Civilized worlds. Right? It's the best places. It's a good, see, there's color. Right? I mean, the last time we were in the library, bad things happened, right? But anyways, let's keep on going.
Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to more Warhammer 40k lore.
What is doing
now, as I'm sure you're aware by now, the 41st millennium is quite often not a particularly pleasant place to live.
Nope.
And indeed, quite a few worlds are downright nightmarish, inhabited
yes,
by a wide variety of creatures that are deeply inhospitable to human life. Like, for example, plants, whose natural saliva or nectar would
no problems for the Katachan.
simply melt a human's face directly off their skull. And this particular piece of flora would still be considered fairly harmless by the standards of the planet in general.
It's not going to run at you or something.
Not to mention the planets where merely existing is basically hell. Like a Forge world, for example, where the average human being is nothing more than a replaceable cog in a vast, grinding machine that could not care less about the fate and the comforts of its individual component parts. However, it might shock you to learn that not all worlds are like that. In fact,
sounds nice.
Not even the majority of worlds are like that. The most common planet classification.
Just a question, you guys. Again, put it all in the comments, please. I have been listening to a lot of audiobooks lately, and the thing is, I have yet to encounter one that particularly describes Terra, the living conditions in Terra. How's Earth doing, you guys? Because the books or the audiobooks were limited to the throne room, to the actual palace, but it never went beyond the immediate vicinity. I imagined the whole thing to be like the Forbidden City in Beijing, where you have the throne room in the middle, and then you have like the city around it, you know, the great library, the great archives, stuff like that around it. But what of the rest of Terra? I have yet to actually encounter an audiobook that particularly describes Terra. So, again, comments, please.
Vacation in the Imperium of Man is that of Y-class planets, also known as civilized worlds. What? And they're a far cry.
Wait, so does this mean that Forge World or Agri Worlds, or Hive Worlds, aren't considered as civilized planets? Or is the classification like, if this is a Terran-like planet, or we will make this one civilized just like Terra? Is that the reasoning here? Comments, please.
From the usual horrors of the 41st millennium, as, well, they're pretty much like Earth is today.
Oh.
Now, granted, that's taken a turn for the worst in the last 10 to 20 years, but still, civilized worlds are, by most metrics, actually pretty decent places to live, with a standard of living, again, fairly comparable to that of our own current-day Earth civilization. The majority of the population are engaged in various civil or social enterprises, be it running companies, construction, or services like banking, etc. to the population.
All right, understood.
Or waging war on one another, as another common feature of civilized worlds is that they are not necessarily a uniform planet, as in unified under a single leader. Well, this is where it gets somewhat complicated. You know how back in the olden days you could have...
The patterns sound like sounds like Terran like, let's turn it or let's classify it as a civilized world. Wait, what was the name of that planet they conquered before the Interrex? The one with the false emperor, or who considered himself to be the emperor of mankind? It was definitely confusing. We have a video about that, but anyways. Uh so Terran like worlds equal civilized, or they will classify it as civilized. Is that how they work? They won't terraform it into an agri or a forge world. Is that how it works? Comments, please.
Kingdoms that ruled over other kingdoms, or
I
even
like this one.
empires with smaller kingdoms and crowns underneath the overall crown of the emperor. Well, that's kind of how a civilized world also often works, where you have various power blocks and nations and factions like countries scattered across the
Of
planet in
course.
question that are all under the technical leadership, of course,
Here, you guys, again, listening to audiobooks right now, our author or our creator is basically disturbing Terran like planets that had to be placed under the Great Crusade, or that was reconquered, or brought under the heel of the Empire. But he's not particularly describing Terra. Among all of those books that I went through, those little tidbits or all those lores that I've gone through these past few months, I have actually yet to encounter one that particularly describes Terra in detail. Because again, throne room, like I said, how I imagine the whole thing, the only thing that they usually that's usually described is the emperor's throne. The throne room or the palace, that's it. Again, I consider it just like the walled city in Beijing, where you have the throne room in the middle and then an entire city built around it. But what's beyond that particular city? We don't know. Parang, it's like no one's actually described Terra in detail. Anyways, keep on going.
of the planetary governor. But for all other intents and purposes, internal diplomacy and interactions with the other nations on the planet, they are independent. So far as they're able to pay the imperial tithe, anyway.
So again, again, it's all about the imperial tithe, and the concept of nations and factions within that planet still exists. Since again, quote unquote, Terran like equals civilized, unlike in Hive World, unlike in Krieg, it's like one hive versus another hive, which is basically just fighting over like a crap hole. But here, I guess they retain the concept of nations. So,
ways. This is a state of being that is allowed to continue on a civilized world because there isn't really any particularly pressing need to interfere in it. On something like a forge world or an agri world, the potential
they can't. The empire spread too thin, so no need to abolish the system. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Whereas Agri World and Forge World, the whole thing is just already the whole planet's considered to be broken. Let's just strip it down for parts. I mean, if it's an Agri World, let's strip it down for nutrients or something.
potential for planetary war, wiping out production centers, or destroying entire years of crops would of course be an absolutely devastating thing, and would directly interfere with the planet's ability to pay its tithe to the wider Imperium. But a civilized world doesn't
Taxes.
really have a specialized produce in the same way that a forge world or an agri world might. Indeed, one could easily argue that one of the primary classifications for a civilized world is 1. Technology level, above that of a feudal world, a medium-sized to small population by imperial standards, so up to maybe 20-odd billion people, tops. In other words, a pre-Hive world civilization. Although, well, see, the thing with Hive worlds is the lore on that one has been vacillating.
Wait, hold on. If it's at least post feudal world, this mean that despite its Terran like quality, they're going to simply strip it down for parts, or they're going to transform it or terraform it into a forge or an agri world. Is that it? Because here's the thing, as long as you can pay the tithe, you're fine, right? But um that whole feudal thing, post-feudal thing, kind of puts a spin into it. Like, you're going to ruin a perfectly good Terran-like planet because it's still in its feudal stages. Anyways, let's keep on going.
A little bit back and forth, where hive worlds are supposed to be the only worlds like it, where the hives themselves have been created with technology that is now in essence long lost. But in more recent lore, it has been suggested that entire hives can in fact be constructed. It is obviously going to be an absolutely hilariously enormous undertaking.
I mean, if you think about it, all modern cities are hives. I mean, like, for example, I think it was Boston, Massachusetts. You've got the Vatican. You've got Paris, the catacombs underneath. Basically, one civilization builds on top of another, a new one, and so on and so forth. Like, for example, in Rome, in the Vatican, they're always having trouble going through with their underground rail system project, with their subway project, for the simple reason that every time they try to dig, they run into into Roman buildings or to Roman artifacts underneath their old streets. So they can't just destroy the whole thing. It has to be protected, or it has to be excavated by law. And I forgot, was it Brooklyn or 5 Points underneath? Basically, we just build on top of each other. That's how it usually works, or at least that's how I see hive cities. One civilization built on top of another, and sooner or later, the poorest of the poor is going to find the lower levels, and that's where they're going to live. And in Las Vegas, in present day, actually, there are some people who lost everything and currently live in these underground cities. And the thing about Las Vegas is that there wasn't even a past civilization to build upon. Unlike, for example, in New York, Paris, the Vatican, where they built on top of Rome, they built on top of the previous settlements. There was no previous settlement in Las Vegas for the simple reason that they built it out of nothing in the middle of the desert. But it's already happening. It's still happening right now. It's already happening. So, anyways. At least it's how I see hive worlds.
And fantastically resource intensive, to the point where in all due likelihood it will require significant imports of metals from other planets or mining operations in space, and then a few thousand years of active construction work, but you could absolutely build a hive.
Of course.
It would not be economical in any but the most extreme of circumstances, but you theoretically could. So again, 20 billion or so perhaps is probably what you're roughly looking at as a max. As another key defining factor of a civilized world is the fact that it is largely, if not indeed entirely, self-sustained. Meaning that it produces all of the food it requires for its own consumption, and even probably exports a fair bit off-world as well, though nothing compared to an agri-world, of course. Similarly, it will also...
Alright, so post-feudal, self-sufficiency, Earth-like, alright, these are the classifications.
Mine and refine its own raw resources, which would probably also preclude the construction of a hive because... oh boy, that is a truly astonishing quantity of material. So there will be a limit to how big a population of such a planet can get before it becomes majoritively dependent upon exports from the wider Imperium.
Of course.
But another definition might be that it is a non-specialized world. Largely, again, because it hasn't really got the infrastructure or the population to expressly specialize. It doesn't have the technology or Adeptus Mechanicus leadership to create a...
So a little bit of everything, self-sufficiency, but not entirely too specific to be a forge or an agri world. Okay.
proper forge system. It doesn't have the infrastructure to become a agri world, or perhaps it simply doesn't have the climate, and it doesn't possess one of the other more interesting features of something, say, a tomb world, for example. And so, as far as the wider Imperium is concerned, a civilized world is just a planet. It lives largely independently from the rest of the Imperium, is allowed largely to run its own internal politics and problems and issues and sort things out practically in whatever way it wishes. As there are democratic planets, there are autocratic planets, there are civilized worlds probably run in a top-down fashion, and there are even civilized worlds, or more correctly, a subset of civilized worlds that are run directly by various imperial organizations, be it the Adeptus Administratum, the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Imperial Guard, or Navy. These worlds are planets that are not so specialized as to fall into any other clear distinction, but that have been claimed by these organizations for one purpose or another. The most common purpose...
Alright, so be average. So you don't get picked for any team, alright? That's how you avoid getting turned into a forge or an agri world, which is hell upon itself.
Is to use it as a sub-classification of civilized world, being paradise worlds. These planets are also often referred to as garden worlds, and their purpose is exactly as it sounds. It is, in essence,
So, tourist destination worlds. Alright, got it. What? I mean, we have specific islands for that. Currently IRL.
To be a galaxy-sized resort.
There we go.
A pleasure district. A retreat for those of particular privilege. Or, on occasion...
In other words, for rich people. Like I said, wherever you may born, whether it be in a war-torn Africa, even in North Korea, as long as you're on the right side. Or if you're rich, you should be fine. So if you were in the 40k universe, as long as you're rich, you should be fine. You get to see some of these paradise worlds.
Long and honorable service, as is the example of the planet Ropanon, which we saw in Tactica Imperialis. That was a garden world ran by the Adeptus Administratum. Initially, the planet was selected as a data storage planet, which basically means that the Administrator moves in truly titanic server farms to store the
Really? Server farms? On a pleasure planet? On a garden planet? I doubt it.
Unimaginable quantities of bureaucratic paperwork that the Administrator never really wants to delete, but basically never really have to reference, and so it can be stored somewhere.
Of course, you could definitely tell bureaucratic corruption right there.
Over there on the galactic fringes. But more pressingly, probably, was the fact that Rofanon was a beautiful, pleasant world. And that allowed the Administratum to shunt over a whole host of privileged personnel to the planet to supervise the data storage operations. Not that they actually require.
So, just like in the real world, bureaucratic corruption, pleasure world for the top brass, where they could supervise the collection and processing of information.
Hired any supervising, but nevertheless, a tremendous number of Administratum personnel found one reason or another to relocate themselves and their entire staff, or those they valued particularly anyways,
Family members.
Rofanon.
Nepo babies.
Strange coinky-dinky-winky that. Now, the tale of Rofanon is a somewhat tragic one, as first, the traitorous...
So, no happy endings for Nepo babies. No happy endings. Burn.
Heretical population rose up against their Administratum overlord and slaughtered them. And then the Imperium gave the planet over to the Tyranids as punishment.
Ah.
So, you know,
I guess why not?
it's not so beautiful anymore, but still, that is one of the variants of civilized worlds.
Yeah.
So, how would life be like on one of these planets? Well, it
Should
would
be
actually
fine,
be,
okay.
again, fairly reminiscent
fine.
of life on Earth today. Most people will have a fair degree of liberty and independence, depending upon the nature.
Again, he's describing Earth-like planets. He's not describing Mother Terra herself. So, have to wonder, is he describing Terra? Is this did Terra remain as is? Again, comments please, because I have no idea. Again, all of those audiobooks, all of those snippets has yet to actually, or at least I have yet to encounter one that particularly describes Terra. Comments please. I mean, the Unification Wars, we couldn't have remained solid. It's why it's called the Unification Wars, because I'm assuming we fragmented into different nations, so we needed to be reunified by the God Emperor or something.
Of the local government ship, of course. In the case of Rofanen, the entire population were basically turned into slaves to serve their Adeptus Administratum overlords, but it was a rather special case. Most of the civilian population will be allowed instead to go about their lives in more or less any way they so choose, so long as it provides a service to the planet. In all due likelihood, there are going to be fairly few civilized worlds with a social welfare system quite as evolved as ours. But it could theoretically happen, as again, the only real qualifying requirement here is for the planet to be self-sustained. So if it is a particularly rich...
Earth-like, self-sufficient, post-feudalistic, and... well, no particular specialization or no claims by any faction, I guess, or sub-faction, because the Adeptus Administratum definitely claimed that Garden World, but this one, no one seems to have claimed it, so yeah.
Planet, or they've come up with some system of government that allows for it to happen, it absolutely could. Speaking of system of governance, I've talked about this on multiple occasions previously, but the various planets within the Imperium are often left to decide how to govern themselves. The exceptions are usually planets that are, again, either highly specialized.
I mean, empire spread too thin, Afghanistan's a lesson, Iraq is a lesson.
Or are under the rule of a more autocratic imperial governor, or alternatively, planets that are simply parceled up into enormous territories ruled over by a local nobility. These can also on occasion mimic essentially the formations of nations. As we know, certain civilized...
There was this teacher who told me, well, he's a professor now, he got his master's, that at least IRL, there are some countries IRL that, you know, that doesn't deserve, not doesn't deserve, but the whole democratic model simply doesn't work for them. So the best thing, especially here in Asia, that the whole democratic model simply wouldn't work. So at least that's what he told me, or at least, you know, that's according to his particular study. But yeah, for some or for a lot of countries, the democratic model simply wouldn't work. I mean, we've seen it. We've seen that kind of history happen in real time, especially in those countries involved in Middle Eastern conflicts. And of course, for us living under democratic rule, we would find the whole thing questionable. That how could, you know, voice it all up into one leader or into one group of people or into one person. Anyways, to each his own, and it's not really up to us since we don't live there. We just, you know, the best thing we can do is at least to mind our own business.
worlds that are in essence dominated by but a small handful of families that have parceled out truly titanic quantities of lands for themselves, where they live in enormous mega mansions supported
Because why
by
not?
literal villages and towns of basically feudal serfs. But the technology level is too high for it to actually be a feudal world.
Of
Indeed,
course.
that might even be the evolution of a feudal world. Now, as far as defense goes, as that is a big thing, these planets
Modern world as is IRL.
will usually have a significantly larger imperial presence than a feudal world. On a feudal world, you might simply have the planetary governor and, 200, 300, 400 men armed with las guns or whatever weapons that to the locals would appear to be absolutely magical. Because that's all they need. Whereas on a civilized world, odds are pretty good that they've figured out how to accelerate pieces of metal at high speed, shall we say. And so a significantly larger garrison is going to be required. Usually in the form of maybe not an Arbites presence.
So basically, post feudalistic would be in terms of weapons development is ballistic weapons. That's what he said, right? Pieces of metal to accelerate small pieces of metal that against another person. That's what he said. Anyways, let's keep
Again,
on
remember,
going.
Arbites are actually ridiculously rare, but there will obviously be a local police force, which will be under the theoretical
What, the
jurisdiction of an Adeptus Arbites officer somewhere.
Yeah.
It will also have its own garrison, PDF, but the planetary defense forces are usually not equipped particularly lavishly, nowhere even remotely close to Imperial Guard standards anyways, as, remember, the Imperial Guard, relatively speaking, are, well, the absolute elites of the Imperium. They are equipped and trained to a degree that very few planetary defense forces could ever even dream of.
I mean, with the exemption of a few units, I don't entirely agree with the status that, most authors or most creators provide the guard, for the simple reason that, based on the audiobooks or based on the recent lore that I've been through, it's at least 90% or 80% of the guards are conscripted. And can you actually consider a conscripted force like that to be akin to a regular army? Anyways.
But again, with a population in the multiple billions, you are going to need an effective way to, remind the population of their loyalties, should they ever waver.
A reminder of their oppression. Alright, let's keep on going.
And if the local planetary defense force cannot be trusted to do so, which in most cases they probably can, with the exception of good old-fashioned heresy, etc., then you
just squash their riots before they begin. Arrest the ringleaders and kill them in the dungeons or something. And they'll never be seen or heard from again. So, do it Stashi style. Just roll up to their houses in the middle of the night. Put a bag over their heads, or at least the suspect's head, or the suspected insurgent or agitator's head. And then, make sure they're never seen or heard from again. Rebellion squashed, example made. I mean, you can even burn the house down if you're feeling boisterous for that particular night. You could definitely be making an example that way.
You're going to need an Imperial garrison as well. Now, Imperial garrisons on a properly large scale are very rare because the Imperium has far better uses for its fighting men than sitting around babysitting a bunch of, relatively speaking, primitives. So there's probably only going to be maybe a regiment or two under the direct command of the local governor. And speaking of planetary defense...
No colonels then? Anyways.
Defense Forces and the Imperial Guard, whilst life in general on a civilized world is pretty great, honestly, especially by 40k standards. I mean, you're probably not massively oppressed. You probably have the freedom to choose your own vacation, unless the planet has a guild system, in which case, well, you're fucked, I suppose.
Or a tithing system. Wait, what happens to these civilized worlds? What's their contribution to the glory of the Empire? Apart from being pretty. Anyways.
And you're probably even going to have a decent amount of, well, entertainment, because planets like these are self-sustained, which means that they need to provide some form of funnies for the population to not go completely crazy. We even know this in the rest of the Imperium, as we've seen mentions of literal TV shows being aired between multiple worlds. So there's going to be a lot of stuff
So there's
to do.
going to be like a Eurovision, something like... Euro Idol or an American Idol, some sort of type deal. The Sector Snap model or something.
A lot of stuff to enjoy, and again, you're not going to be fed into a giant grinder because the gears need to be lubricated with blood or anything like that, which is good. But you might still end up in the Imperial Guard and get dispatched to the ass end of nowhere to be fed piecemeal into a grinder of an entirely different, albeit equally inevitable sort. But your odds of getting conscripted into the Imperial Guard on a civilized world are pretty damn small, really. Civilized worlds are only...
So I love the way he said ass end of nowhere.
Rated as a medium-level tithe planet, and so it will absolutely be expected to raise Imperial Guard regiments, but not that many and not that often. In most cases as well, Imperial Guard regiments are raised from the cream of the crop of the local planetary defense force. And due to the fairly low amounts of PDF that most of these planets tend to have, you're unlikely to be a part of it. In many cases, it's even going to be voluntary service, or a relatively brief period of mandatory service, where if you don't excel at it, you're extremely unlikely to be chosen for the Imperial Guard. Now, of course, yet again, there are absolutely exceptions to this rule. There might be local circumstances. Vostroya comes to mind. Now, Vostroya is technically classified as a forge world due to its close ties with the Adeptus Mechanicus. But were it not for that, Vostroya would probably be classified as a civilized world.
Really?
As it has a pretty high level of technology, but a relatively small population of about 10-odd billion people. Vostroya, of course, has the firstborn rule, whereas a punishment after not taking a side during the Horus Heresy, every firstborn son must join the Imperial Guard. And there are undoubtedly going to be various civilized worlds with traditions similar to, if certainly not identical to this. Imagine, for example, a civilized world that was divided into several different continent-sized nations, constantly vying for dominance over one another. If one of those nations ever managed...
I would honestly... Here's the thing, right? When picking my units, I would rather... Of course, Space Marines, and then you've got the commandos, you've got, well, almost everyone that's got a hard on in serving the Emperor. I prefer the conscripts. I prefer the humans. Like, for example, Krieg. So hardcore! But the thing is, nope, I wouldn't want to be near these people if ever it comes to real life. Alright? So, yeah, I'd rather serve with the conscripts. I'd rather serve, or at least I'd rather pick real people as units.
to actually achieve dominance, there'd probably be a pretty serious tradition of military expertise and exceptionalism on that world, probably leading to a great deal of knowledge about military matters and a large population of soldiers that the new rulers might want to get rid of in order to secure their future rule. Therefore, a tradition to offer extra tithes to the Imperium may be created. Indeed, that could be the reason for why one faction superseded the others in the first place, as it is far from an unheard of tactic for in essence, local warlords to appeal to the Imperium for aid. Basically saying, hey, listen, if you favor me, if you give me a little bit of extra aid or resources, or maybe allow me to borrow a regiment of guardsmen, then I will increase the tithe the planet pays in the future. And assuming he manages to reach the correct Adeptus Administratum drone to whisper his promises to, that may very well be accepted, leading then to a tradition of increased military tithes.
Interesting.
There are also other potential exceptions, as Civilized world is a little bit of a catch-all for a high-technology, not necessarily specialized planet, which means that you might also have things like, say, a world specialized in the extraction of the world's mineral resources, but not on such a scale that it would require a hive city or a massive population of indentured servants.
So, apart from all of those classifications, the planet could simply be stripped for parts, but not to the level of Necromunda. For the simple reason that there's not enough, or for the simple reason that I'm guessing what the planet contains or the natural resources of the planet, particularly in terms of mineral, isn't that important to the Imperium at large. Like, no need for those ion battery packs for las guns or metals for ships. Is that it? That's what he said, right?
This might still be a civilized world, but primarily focused on the extraction of resources, either from the planet itself or from nearby asteroid belts, for example. This would then be sort of
metal asteroid mining, so you've got satellites crisscrossing the planet's Athmo or something?
Kind of technically, in a way, a mining world, but also sort of kind of technically not a mining world as well, as it is not yet fully dedicated to the mass extraction of the planet's resources. As we already mentioned, paradise worlds would be another example. Now, on a mining world, you'd probably require the majority of the people to dig, because if it's a mining world and not...
I mean, if, for example, if the planet's surrounded by an asteroid belt and those asteroids contain a specific mineral that's necessary for the Imperium's operation, these people would be bureaucrats, or at least a support system for the satellites or for the space stations that are responsible for mining those asteroids for the specific mineral. Because who was that? I remember where I read that, because like you need, like, for in order to support one person in current space and present space, in order to support one person, you need at least 1,000 people to run the support system for that one particular person. Same argument as to why these billionaires like Elon or Bezos will not be able to run from Earth, because even if they manage to launch themselves off world, they still need a support system from Earth. The International Space Station has like 10,000 people working around the clock just to make sure that the space station stays in space. Just for the whole thing to remain where it is at all times. It's that hard. Like, so I'm guessing that entire world's job would be to support the space station, or space station running the mining operations around the asteroid belt. What was the name of that video game where you can mine asteroids? I used to be so good at it. I used to explore in it, but you know what? Comments, please. Elite Dangerous! I remember now, Elite Dangerous.
Under the direct supervision of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the excavation methods are probably going to be primitive, at least by, 40k dumper trucks the size of battle titans standards. In the case of something like a garden world, the Imperial Tithe would yet again probably be downgraded, if anything, as these planets aren't exactly set up for housing mass populations or supporting them. If anything, they're intended to have a fairly small, preferably below revolt levels population, entirely dedicated to servicing whatever group of people has decided to claim it for their own. In that case, a small population is, well, actually a benefit, and thus trying to raise Imperial Guard regiments from what is in essence hotel staffers, not really all that worthwhile, frankly. Or you might have something like a world dedicated, at least in part, to worship or to providing certain financial services or administratum server space, as was the case of Rofan. If Rofan was less beautiful, it might simply...
Again, Rofan. No happy endings for Nepo babies.
Just have been a major data hub. And again, raising massed Imperial Guard regiments from population centers like this... not really that beneficial, again. If anything, low population worlds like these will be given a low percentage tithe, maybe expected to raise a regiment, a percentage, maybe 2 of the population every 10 years or something like that, to the point where it won't...
Pretty light tithing systems, or light tithes for them.
Overly affect the population of the planet, or its ability to sustain itself in any way, but will still provide a little bit of a trickle. These planets will support maybe a handful of Imperial Guard regiments, maybe a dozen at absolute max, that then get the replacement personnel from that world. On the other hand, you could also easily have a world of worship, something along the lines of a cardinal world, but not on the direct auspices of...
So more like a mega church world.
the ecclesiarchy, with a very, 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 very fanatical population, where imperial service is viewed as an enormous privilege and an honor. These worlds would probably have a much, much higher dedicated population trying to enter into military service and attempting to excel in order to be selected for service in the Imperial Guard during the periods when new regiments or reinforcements are levied from the world. So, yeah, beyond the ever-present
So, non-Kriegers or non-Cadians.
danger of getting recruited, life on a civilized world, life on the majority of worlds, in fact, as again, Y-class planets are the most common in the Imperium, is actually pretty decent.
Nice.
You've got a television, you've got your own apartment, more than many you can brag about today in our economy, and you've probably got a fair degree of freedom. You might even live in something that resembles a democracy, one with forced military service on occasion from an uncaring and far larger Imperium.
Not so bad, I guess.
Sure, but otherwise, it's pretty nice. You're probably not going to have quite the excess of material wealth that we have, as if a civilized world has a significant surplus of something, be it food or minerals, etc., that will probably be sent out into the wider Imperium, bearing you in mind yet again that for the Imperium, the surplus produce of a single planet isn't actually that big of a deal. That's why there are dedicated mining worlds where the Imperium strips away the very mantle of entire planets. So, the casual mineral resources of a single planet is... It's nice, but it's not something the Imperium...
Not really that necessary that they have to strip the entire planet for it.
Will fall without. However, Imperial governors too, of course, are ambitious creatures. And the fate of a civilized world will probably largely depend upon who is currently governing it. If it is governed by an individual with ambitions of grandeur to attempt to elevate his status in imperial politics, he may very well volunteer his world to provide additional tithes, be it agricultural produce or mineral resources, or increased tithes of soldiers.
Ergo, the very definition of greed. Because you're already living a lofty life, why put yourself under the radar?
In these cases,
I mean, that's how you survive these things. Don't be important to the plot.
liberties amongst the civilian populace may often be the first on the chopping block. Various creature comforts sacrificed to increase productivity. Food rationing being enforced, for example, to make sure that the planet has more agricultural produce to export, etc., etc. But that is only in the case of, again, rather ambitious imperial governors. The fact is that if the average citizen of a civilized world is living a pretty good life, the imperial governor is living in absolute fucking opulence.
Heaven.
He has a palace in the sky,
Epstein Island level here.
in essence, and all the pleasure slaves he could ever possibly want or desire.
I mean, you already have your own Epstein Island. Why bother being seen on the radar, or why risk getting yourself on the radar?
Not to mention access to the rest of the Imperium's entertainment as well. In all due likelihood, unless it is a particularly driven individual, he's probably just going to be another fat, selfish noble with no greater ambition than to secure for himself the tastiest morsels, the prettiest slave girls, and the softest sponges.
Because why not?
So, the next time you're thinking about how awful it would be to live in the 41st millennium, do bear in mind that it doesn't
Be rich, just be rich, be born in the right family, be born on the right side.
necessarily have to be hell. Indeed, life on the majority of civilized planets is pretty okay, fairly tolerable, although do bear in mind that
Room for improvement, that's what he's saying. Room for improvement.
Talan, you know, the desert world that is covered in nothing but sand and dead rock after the heretic legions virus bombed it during the Horus Heresy, it too is considered a civilized world. So,
In other words, a very loose definition
I guess as
of
long
what constitutes civilized.
as you're a fan of Lawrence of Arabia, it's not too bad. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching,
that was
and I hope to
awesome.
see you all again soon. Till then,
Bye!
have a good day.
Anyways, you guys, that's all the time we have for tonight. I'll see you around, alright? See ya. Bye! Thank you for watching, guys. Now, if you want me to check out other stories here on YouTube, please let me know in the comments. We upload every weekend, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Well, as much as I want to, really. And don't forget to check out our Twitch channel where you can watch this dumpster fire go down live. Again, don't forget to subscribe. It really helps out with the algo. Now, class dismissed.